Chasen's Restaurant, West Hollywood, March 1958. The evening light filters through heavy curtains into what many consider the most powerful dining room in America, where industry titans gather nightly to conduct the business that shapes dreams and destroys careers with equal efficiency. The air carries the scent of expensive tobacco and aged whiskey, mixed with the subtle aroma of money and influence that permeates every surface. This is where Hollywood royalty holds court, where a single conversation over dinner can launch careers or end them, where the unwritten rules of power are enforced through subtle gestures and carefully measured words. The leather banquettes and mahogany paneling speak of old-world elegance, but the undercurrents of competition and territorial marking are distinctly modern. The soft sound of piano music drifts from the bar area, mixing with the gentle clink of crystal and the murmur of voices discussing projects worth millions of dollars. Waiters move with practiced discretion, understanding that their employment depends on absolute confidentiality regarding the conversations they overhear. Frank Sinatra occupies his usual booth near the back wall, 42 years old, and radiating the kind of casual authority that comes from being acknowledged as the most powerful entertainer in America. His presence transforms the atmosphere of any room he enters, creating an invisible gravitational field that draws attention and deference from everyone within his orbit. Sinatra's recent comeback has elevated him beyond mere celebrity into something approaching cultural monarchy. His recording career flourishes, his film roles multiply, and his personal influence extends into politics and business at the highest levels. When Frank Sinatra expresses an opinion or makes a request, wise men listen carefully and respond appropriately. Tonight, Sinatra holds court with his usual retinue of associates, advisors, and admirers, men who understand that proximity to power requires constant vigilance and absolute loyalty. The conversation flows easily between business opportunities and personal gossip, seasoned with the kind of insider knowledge that makes or breaks reputations in a town built on image and perception. If you want to see more stories about Hollywood legends who proved that true power comes from inner strength rather than external influence, subscribe to Glenn Ford Hidden Legacy. Glenn Ford sits alone at a corner table, 42 years old and appearing perfectly content with his solitude, despite the social energy swirling around him. A glass of bourbon sits at his right hand, barely touched, while he observes the evening's drama with the detached interest of a man who understands human nature but feels no need to participate in its more theatrical expressions. Ford's presence in the restaurant represents a different kind of power, one that operates through competence and integrity rather than influence and intimidation. His recent films have established him as one of Hollywood's most reliable leading men, an actor whose name on a marquee guarantees both critical respect and commercial success. But Ford has never been interested in the political aspects of his profession, preferring to let his work speak for itself, rather than engaging in the endless networking and favor trading that dominates industry social life. He comes to Chasen's for the food and the quiet, not for the opportunity to be seen or to curry favor with those who control his career. The evening proceeds with typical Chasen sophistication until something shifts in the room's dynamic, a subtle change in energy that experienced observers recognize as the prelude to confrontation. Sinatra's attention has focused on Ford's table, and those familiar with the chairman's moods understand that something is about to unfold. The catalyst appears to be a recent casting decision for a prestige picture that both men were considered for, a role that ultimately went to Ford despite Sinatra's behind-the-scenes lobbying for the part. The disappointment rankles with Sinatra, not because he needs the work, but because he cannot accept the idea that anyone might be chosen over him for anything he desires. Sinatra rises from his booth with the fluid grace of a predator that has identified its target, his movement drawing the attention of everyone in the restaurant despite the casual nature of his approach. Conversations pause as diners sense the potential for drama, understanding that they may be about to witness something that will be discussed in industry circles for years to come. Ford notes Sinatra's approach without obvious concern, taking a measured sip of his bourbon while maintaining the same relaxed posture he has held throughout the evening. There's nothing defensive or challenging about his body language, just the calm readiness of a man who has faced genuine danger and emerged with his confidence intact. "Glenn," Sinatra says as he reaches Ford's table, his voice carrying the particular tone that industry insiders recognize as a warning of potential trouble. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" Ford gestures to the empty chair across from him without speaking, acknowledging Sinatra's request with the minimum courtesy required by social convention. His silence is not rude, but neither is it welcoming, creating an immediate tension that spreads outward from their table like ripples in still water. Sinatra settles into the chair with obvious satisfaction, understanding that he has successfully claimed Ford's attention and, by extension, the attention of everyone else in the restaurant. This is the kind of moment that feeds his sense of personal power, the knowledge that his mere presence can alter the dynamics of any social situation. "Heard you got the Kramer picture." Sinatra begins, his tone carrying just enough edge to suggest that congratulations are not forthcoming. Interesting choice on his part. I thought he was looking for someone with more range. The insult is delivered with Sinatra's characteristic skill, wrapped in enough ambiguity to maintain plausible deniability while ensuring that its target understands the intended message. Around the restaurant, conversations continue at lower volumes as diners strain to follow the exchange without appearing to eavesdrop. Ford meets Sinatra's gaze directly, his pale blue eyes showing no reaction to the provocation. He takes another sip of bourbon, the movement deliberate and unhurried, then sets the glass down with the precise placement of a man who controls every aspect of his behavior. The silence that follows lasts perhaps 10 seconds, but in the charged atmosphere of the restaurant it feels much longer. Sinatra's smile falters slightly as he realizes that Ford has no intention of rising to his bait, no plan to engage in the verbal sparring that the chairman uses to establish dominance over potential rivals. Of course, Kramer's always been a bit eccentric in his casting choices. Sinatra continues, his voice gaining volume as he attempts to force a response from his uncooperative target. Sometimes he mistakes quiet for deep, if you know what I mean. Ford's expression remains unchanged, showing no sign that he has even heard Sinatra's words, beyond basic acknowledgement of their existence. He reaches for his bourbon again, the movement containing no urgency or nervousness, just the natural rhythm of a man enjoying a drink while someone else talks nearby. The lack of response clearly frustrates Sinatra, who has built his reputation on the ability to command attention and provoke reactions from anyone he chooses to engage. His body language shifts subtly, becoming more aggressive as he realizes that his usual tactics are having no effect on his intended target. "Matter of fact," Sinatra says, leaning forward in his chair with obvious intent to escalate, "I'm thinking maybe the whole strong silent type thing is getting a little old-fashioned. Audiences want actors who can actually express something, not just stand there looking stoic." Several diners openly stare now, recognizing that they are witnessing something extraordinary. Frank Sinatra, the man who has intimidated studio executives and silenced critics with a single sharp word, is being completely ignored by someone who appears utterly indifferent to his power and presence. Ford finishes his bourbon with the same measured pace he has maintained throughout Sinatra's monologue, then signals the waiter for his check without acknowledging Sinatra's continued presence at his table. The gesture is not dismissive so much as naturally conclusive, the action of a man who has finished his business and sees no reason to extend the evening further. The complete absence of response begins to affect Sinatra in ways that direct confrontation never could. His usual confidence wavers as he realizes that nothing in his considerable arsenal of intimidation techniques has any impact on Ford's serene indifference. For perhaps the first time in years, the chairman finds himself genuinely unsettled by another person's behavior. "You know what, Glenn?" Sinatra says, his voice rising slightly as his legendary self-control begins to crack. "I'm trying to have a conversation here. Least you could do is pretend to be interested." Ford looks directly at Sinatra for the first time since the conversation began, his gaze steady and completely without hostility. For a moment, the two men simply observe each other across the small table, representatives of different approaches to power and success measuring each other with professional interest. Then Ford stands, the movement fluid and unhurried despite Sinatra's obvious agitation. He places exact change for his bill on the table, adds a generous tip, and adjusts his jacket, with the careful attention to detail that characterizes everything he does. The entire restaurant watches in fascination as Ford nods once to Sinatra, a gesture that manages to convey both acknowledgement and dismissal simultaneously. Then he turns and walks toward the exit, with the same calm pace he has maintained throughout the entire encounter. Sinatra remains seated at the abandoned table, staring after Ford's departing figure with an expression of complete bewilderment. For the first time in recent memory, someone has refused to engage with his power, declined to participate in the game that has defined his relationships with everyone else in his orbit. The silence that follows Ford's departure is profound and uncomfortable, broken only by the distant sound of piano music and the nervous whisper of conversations resuming at reduced volume. Every person in the restaurant understands they have witnessed something unprecedented, a moment when absolute power encountered absolute indifference and discovered its own limitations. Ford drives home through the Hollywood Hills with the same calm demeanor he brought to his encounter with Sinatra, feeling no triumph or satisfaction from what transpired. For him, the evening represents nothing more than dinner interrupted by someone else's need for drama, a minor inconvenience that required no special response or consideration. Sinatra remains at Chasen's for another hour, attempting to restore his equilibrium through conversation with his associates and the consumption of several more drinks. But the encounter with Ford has shaken something fundamental in his understanding of how power operates, introducing doubt into a worldview that previously admitted no uncertainty. Word of the confrontation spreads through Hollywood with the speed of all good gossip, gaining dramatic flourishes and losing essential details with each retelling. But those who witnessed it firsthand understand its true significance, recognizing that they saw a masterclass in the difference between manufactured authority and genuine strength. In the weeks that follow, Sinatra finds himself thinking often about Ford's unshakable calm, trying to understand how someone could remain so completely unaffected by pressure that would have intimidated most men in Hollywood. The experience forces him to reconsider his own methods of establishing dominance, to question whether true power really requires the submission of others. Ford continues his career with the same professional dedication that has always characterized his work, treating the Sinatra incident as ancient history within days of its occurrence. For him, the encounter holds no special significance beyond its demonstration that silence can be more powerful than the loudest voice. The lesson spreads quietly through the industry, carried by those who understand that authentic confidence never needs to prove itself through confrontation or intimidation. Real power, they learn, operates through competence and integrity rather than bluster and threat. Chasen continues serving Hollywood's elite for another 3 decades, hosting countless conversations about deals and careers, and the endless competition for status and recognition. But old-timers always remember it as the place where Frank Sinatra learned that some men cannot be intimidated, impressed, or controlled because they derive their strength from sources beyond the reach of external influence. For more stories about Hollywood legends who proved that true strength comes from inner conviction rather than external authority, subscribe to Glenn Ford Hidden Legacy.